So let me say good morning to everybody. We're doing an earlier start today than usual, so for sure morning for everybody on today's call. My name is Jim McDonald with Torrey Hills Capital. Pleased to be hosting today's call featuring Microbix Biosystems, a developer of proprietary biological and technological solutions for human health and well-being. I don't like to steal all of Cameron's thunder before he gets into the presentation, but let me just touch on a few highlights. So number one, as you can see on the screen there, the company does trade in the US on the OTCQX, ticker symbol MBXBF. And it also trades up in Canada on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the ticker symbol MBX. The company operates on a fiscal year, which ends September 30th, so slightly different than a calendar year. But for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2021, the company reported revenue of 18.6 million, which represented a 77% increase over prior year revenue of 10.5 million. Similarly, and for the 6 months ended March 31, 2022, the company reported revenue of 9.7 million, an increase of 30% over the same period a year earlier. And joining me today from the company, and also as you can see on the screen, I've got Cameron Groome, the company's CEO. Before I turn the call over to Cameron, just want to go through logistics fairly quickly. I think most of you have been on calls with me over the last 2+ years, but just as a reminder, and for those who have not, we like our webinars to replicate our in-person meetings, which we encourage and prefer to be as interactive as possible. With that in mind, if you do have questions along the way, please feel free to ask them. Just a quick reminder, the best way to ask questions is, again, use the navigation pane at the bottom of the screen, click on the Q&A or the chat button. One of us will see that and have those questions presented and answered. Just a reminder too, if your question is presented and not immediately addressed, please don't think that we are ignoring it or have not seen it. We have, but just know that the question is going to be answered in normal course of business in the next couple of slides, and so didn't want to interrupt the presenter, didn't want to interrupt Cameron to do that. Alternatively, also at the end of the presentation, we'll have a more formal Q&A and actually can unmute microphones and allow you to speak directly to Cameron. The best way to do that, of course, is again, use the navigation pane, click on the raise hand button. We'll see that, be able to unmute your microphones, and then allow you to have direct conversation back and forth with Cameron. With that said, I will remain on the call throughout, but removing myself from video and audio, but moderating questions as they come in. Enjoy the presentation. As I said in the beginning, this is a terrific little company that is growing rapidly, one that should be on your radar. So with that, let me turn the controls over to Cameron.
Thanks so much, Jim. Really appreciate, first of all, everyone taking the time to spend with us this morning. I'll look to wind up my presentation in about in no more than 40 minutes and get you out of here in good time, in order that we've got some opportunity for questions for those who can stay longer. So I think what you'll see today is that Microbix is, as Jim indicated, a growing company with some great opportunities. And this is really for you as investors, an opportunity to participate in a company that is already profitable and has already well capitalized as well, has all the capabilities, customers, and we're creating and enhancing our infrastructure to be able to support growth from the 20 million run rate that we're at right now to up over 100 million within the next 2 to 3 years. And the margins we're generating are very strong for net cash flow generation as we go through that process. And we're very broadly involved in the global diagnostics industry, specifically in infectious disease diagnostics. And as we come into a world where all sorts of capacity has been built, testing capacity for COVID, we're really at the forefront of intelligently redeploying that capacity for better healthcare on a very broad basis, not just with regards to COVID, but the respiratory category more broadly, and a whole bunch of other infectious disease categories. And I'll go into some of the opportunities specifically around that, why we have a very strong level of reasoned optimism. So I'll go into a little bit of what we do, and I'll just share screen here for a corporate presentation that I'll speak to as we go through here. The company, and I'm sorry, I've just got to swap screens here, just a moment. And of course, they've changed the interface, so we're going to deal with that by, excuse me a moment. There, thank you. So we're very much involved in infectious disease testing, and I'll go into a little bit of the categories specifically that we're into in this respect and who our clients are. Of course, we're a public company, so we do have a forward-looking statements or safe harbor caution, although we do like to keep it brief, but you all know what that means, and I don't need to explain it to you. What we do is we create a whole bunch of products that support the global testing industry. So the big companies like, Abbott, Becton Dickinson, Cepheid, Diasor, and Elitech, et cetera, that go down the alphabet. As a smaller entity, we don't compete with these companies, but rather we supply them with materials. And we started out supplying companies like those with ingredients to make tests, and specifically those being what are called antigens, the purified and inactivated viruses and bacteria that are used to manufacture certain tests. So we actually have tremendous experience, over 30 years experience in growing, safely growing, purifying and inactivating different viruses and bacteria for test manufacturing. So a tremendous reservoir of knowledge. And what we've done to be able to grow the company more recently is move from that relatively anonymous ingredients manufacturing into the manufacture and sale of specific and fully regulated medical devices that again support infectious disease testing. And those are in two categories. One is in our quality assessment products, and these are what are called test controls, mimics of positive and negative patient samples. So you can actually check if tests are working. And also some of the materials needed to enable the collection of patient samples and the testing of those patient samples, something called viral transport medium. I'll be able to show you a little bit of specific products as well around those. Because of that migration up the value chain to fully branded, regulated, finished products in supporting the industry, we've been seeing big growth in our sales and expansion in our margins. And we're now, as I mentioned, positioning to go from a very profitable company with more modest sales to an even more profitable company with much larger sales. Just in terms of the team, it isn't just me. This is very much a team sport, building companies, but we've got a great management cadre with a very qualified chief financial officer, chief operating officer, head of sales and business development, and SVP of scientific affairs that report into me directly. And then we've got a fantastic bench strength in our director and senior director level staff and our managerial staff below that to really perform and execute on everything I'm going to talk about today. We're very much a manufacturing business as well. So this isn't vaporware, virtual company. We have, as I'll describe, 3 manufacturing sites. We're actually looking at the possibility of a 4th to support our growth and make the products that we sell. So it gives us great control and incredibly important in today's supply chain challenge world as well, that we're not dependent on a vast array of subcontractors to deliver finished products. We've also got a very experienced and capable board of directors, whereby they provide really the check in with strategy, add experience and capabilities to our management team and help enable us. We have an independent board chairman, Mark Marino, who brings great experience with firms such as Merck and Apotex. Our audit committee chair, Von Pantaloni, who is a chartered director and tremendous experience in the life science sector as well, an MD, Peter Bletcher, very capable and an entrepreneur in his own right, Mark Cochran, former senior executive with different major firms, including Johns Hopkins, Joe Renner, senior director there, and Jennifer Stewart, a government relations specialist. We are, as Jim mentioned, listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange with a market capitalization that's been around the 70 to 80 million mark. We've been up over 100 million before the biotech sector, life science sector really took a valuation hit the new year, along with many other sectors of the market, with reasonable trading liquidity. We are fully capitalized as well to execute on the growth strategy that we have. We have over 14 million in the bank right now and access to a further 2 million by line of credit. These numbers are as of our March 31 quarter. We continue to build up our cash position and in fact are even looking at share buybacks as a potential use of some of the cash we're accumulating. The financial position, very strong. Our current ratio for our latest reported quarter is up over 6, and our debt to equity ratio is below 0.4 and falling. So again, puts us in a very good position to ride out the current market instability that we're seeing. And we're trading at around 15 times trailing earnings and well below that multiple in terms of our forward earnings outlook for fiscal 22 and 23. So again, some very good value. The areas we work in, I mentioned, biggest growth driver for us will be our test controls business. And this is, we refer to them as CAPs, QAPs, because it's a convenient regulatory catch-all for different uses of the products, some of which are fully regulated, some of which are research use only. But these support test makers, these support the clinical labs themselves, and all help ensure that a wide variety of tests are actually functioning properly. Tremendously important products, and we'll go into what they are and some of the very attractive margins associated with them. We also make the viral transport medium that you see. These are the tubes of stuff that the swabs go into for COVID test, for example. And that solution is required to stabilize patient samples so they don't degrade before they can be tested in a laboratory setting. And then, of course, our ingredients or antigen business, which has brought us tremendous connectivity all across the diagnostics industry. And all that is being done at 3 adjacent facilities in Mississauga, Ontario, a few miles from the Toronto Pearson International Airport. So a tremendous transportation hub for global shipping, which is very important to us, as we do the majority of our sales outside of Canada to global companies, and provides us the shipping links we need for product, as well as a significant urban area to source skilled life sciences employees. Our 3 buildings are really dedicated across our 3 major product lines. 235 watt line, the one to the left of your screen, is where we manufacture our test control products. And that is a building that should be able to generate in excess of $50 million in annual revenues out of that 10,000 square foot site. Our hot biology building 265 watt line in the middle, and the blue is 14,000 square feet. And that building was doing about $1 million a month, 12 million a year prior to COVID. And we're just commissioning now our third site, which was where we will install the fully automated manufacturing of our VTM, viral transport medium, which will have capacity to generate millions of dollars per month in sales as it fully automates. That product line did about 5 million last year. It will do about 5 million this year, but we'll have capacity for at least 5 times that number as we fully commission full automation. And just to give you a glimpse in terms of the customer, the kind of customer relationships we had, this list that you'll see was produced by me just sort of over coffee on a weekend. Was looking and saying, gosh, we have to have a way of illustrating some of the customers and collaborators without really telling too much about those relationships. But this gives you an idea. This is about half of the companies that we deal with as customers or collaborators. And it really is a who's who of the diagnostic test manufacturing industry, the clinical laboratory industry, and the clinical laboratory proficiency testing and accreditation agencies. These are the groups that are our customers. And alongside the product products we've created, we have these customer relationships to drive through sales. And our challenges now are really about scaling the physical manufacturing capacity that we have and moving to a much higher level of production and having the support and control systems, the digitization of our quality management documentation, and the upgrades to our enterprise resource planning capability software to make sure that we are supporting and maintaining the high quality required of medical device manufacturing as we expand our revenues at least 5-fold over the next couple of years. So that's where we're going. I'll talk a little bit now about the quality assessment products, as it probably still hasn't clicked in your mind about what exactly I'm referring to. But if you are running a diagnostic test, let's say we'll use a COVID test, for example, and you get a positive patient result or a negative patient result on that test, well, the first question needs to be, how do you know? How do you know a positive result was really positive or a negative result was really negative? Of course, a positive result, if you got that, you're concerned, you're staying home from work, you're isolating yourself from friends and family. There are real consequences of a positive test result, and you want to know that that's accurate. Equally, a negative test result, well, if you test negative, then you are proceeding and perhaps going back to work in a hospital or person support worker, seeing relatives with pre-existing health conditions. You want to know that that's a correct result. So each of these have consequences. If you get a false negative, now you're going to visit elderly parents, friends that might be immunocompromised, going back into a work setting, and you could genuinely harm people as a result of that false negative or that false positive that has the economic consequences of missing work, locking down communities unnecessarily. Each of these has a problem. So what we do is create perfect mimics of patient samples in order that you can actually challenge the tests and make sure that those tests are providing you accurate results. We do that by creating either a positive or a negative mimic of a patient sample. And here's one in one of our envelopes. We'll just turn off my virtual background, perhaps, or you can see it. But they will be on a nasopharyngeal swab that will look to a test exactly, for example, like a positive patient sample for COVID. for a test, it will not know the difference. And you can then validate whether the technician is conducting the test properly in terms of the steps and procedures, whether the reagents that come with the test have spoiled or functioning properly, being used in the wrong order, for example, and whether the instrument itself is calibrated properly, and whether it has could be a corroded electrode, it could be a blocked microfluidic channel. Any of those things can cause a false positive or a false negative result. And our products are what permit you to check whether it's working. And we sell those products to several different categories of people in the parties in the industry for that very purpose. And I'll just share screen again and scroll down. Excuse me. This system is a little more temperamental than it has, but there we go. So this is a very complex task to do. You have to know how to grow or handle the organisms and produce them at scale. We know how to inactivate them, of course, so they're non-infectious. In terms of these samples, we can augment them using anything from any number of techniques up to and including synthetic biology. We know how to formulate them so they're indicative of patient sample concentrations. We have formats such as the Copan flock swabs that I showed you just before. We know how to stabilize them so they're stable at room temperature for 2 years, at least 2 years. And we have, of course, all the quality systems to validate this, because if you're going to have products to check the accuracy of tests, they better bloody well be working themselves, because people are relying on them. And what we produce has all sorts of advantages with regards to their performance over any alternative available. So one of the things that companies have done in the past is say, well, maybe, you know, I'll check the test and I'll save a sample from Bob, who we're pretty sure had COVID, and we're going to keep Bob's sample in the back of the fridge, and periodically we'll pull it out, use that to challenge and test. Well, that's just not adequate. Those are not demonstrated to be stable. They're still infectious, and they don't provide the capabilities that our products do. And we've already migrated it. You know, we're a Canadian company, so as good Canadians, I'll be stereotypical and I'll use a Wayne Gretzky reference, which is you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going to be. And that's what we've very much done in anticipating and working with the industry to support the products not that they have now, but the products that they're developing as well. And so we've already moved heavily into the arena of multiplex tests, where you're checking for multiple viruses at the same time from one sample. So for example, if you check our documentation from last December, December 2021, you'll see that we already created fully regulated 4-plex test controls to support the tests that companies will be launching this fall of 2022. And as you might anticipate, we're already working to support companies with even more test channels from one patient sample. So this fall, you'll be able to go in if you had a respiratory complaint. The test will check you for 4 different viruses simultaneously. Next year, that may be 10 or more. And you can imagine just how much that improves medicine, whether that's for respiratory infection, bladder infection, screening for cancer-causing viruses, such as human papillomavirus. There are all sorts of these applications that are tremendously important. And we're also doing a tremendous amount of work with companies involved in checking for antibiotic resistance or antimicrobial resistance, as it's spoken of in the trade. And, imagine a world which will be in the not too distant future, where if you've got an infected cut, instead of going to the doctor and the doctor saying, well, yes, it does look infected, and then you both stare at each other with a blank look, and he blindly prescribes an antibiotic that will probably, hopefully work. Imagine doing one swab that says, first identifies what bacteria is causing that infection, and then immediately following it up in the doctor's office with a follow-up that will screen that bacteria for every known gene that can cause antimicrobial resistance, and then making a perfectly informed decision about what antibiotic to prescribe. So this is the capability that's been created as coming out of COVID for this better healthcare, where you're widely screening for the causes of infection and then triaging effectively as to how best to treat them. And this is the kind of environment that we're supporting. And as these different companies roll out their tests, we're supporting, I can't say all of them, but I will say many of them, and I might even soon say most of them. So gives us some tremendous capabilities. And part of where that starts to split out, and on this slide, and I'm test driving this layout a little bit, where we started in the industry was with the PT category, or proficiency testing is what that stands for, where certain agencies check the competence of clinical labs by sending them blinded samples to check if their tests are working. Then they get a pass-fail on that. If they pass, everything's good. If they fail, there's an investigation, remediation. If it's not satisfactory, those labs will lose their license to conduct tests. We gain tremendous experience in that, supporting that niche area. Then we've moved into the training of technicians with our onboard kits and the qualification of new instruments for use in the labs. And those can be kits of positive and negative samples to help ensure that the instruments are safely onboarded, hence the name. And then the third category, proceed. This is where we're getting some tremendous uptick in our revenues in the balance of 2022 and through 2023 and beyond, is actually including some of our controls, one or more in each box of test cartridges for instruments that might be used in a doctor's office or a pharmacy, so that any error will be caught after a minimum of a fixed number of tests. So for example, every box of 25 test cartridges would include one of our controls, and the instructions for use is that the first cartridge, when you open the box, is sacrificed for use with the control to ensure that everything's working and you know what you're doing. And then an error can never persist across too many tests, and incredibly important from a regulatory point of view to permit those instruments to be used outside of the lab setting, and to ensure that they're not causing more harm than good. And then the last category, that the most regulated one in the clinical labs themselves, where our test controls will literally bookend a shift of testing, so that you start the day with a known positive and a known negative to make sure that you pick up both of those accurately and end the day the same way. And then all the tests in the middle, you can have greater confidence that they were functioning properly. And when we do the work on these products and take one of these swabs, we're literally taking a product that costs tens of cents and turn it, sophisticated molded piece of plastic with fibers oriented mathematically on the head of it, but a product that costs tens of cents, and turning it into a control, a biological product that costs tens of dollars. So you can imagine the margin that we're able to capture in that value, in increase to the value of that product for these very specific uses. So we've moved that business up in the past 12 months to over a $5 million a year business, and that's really going to be taking off. Our building a 235 watt line, we have capacity there for at least 50 million in sales coming out of this product line. And as we automate it fully, we can likely add a zero to that number in terms of the capacity. And we believe certainly we have the customer relationships to start to sell through that capacity. And interestingly, people have asked us, is COVID going from epidemic or from pandemic to endemic affecting your business? And is your business going down? Well, to the contrary, it's actually going up, because a lot of these tests were approved under emergency use authorizations where, FDA and other regulators said, well, never mind the normal regulation where you have to have controls associated with these tests. We're going to give you a pass on that for now. And as those emergency use authorizations get a little bit longer in the tooth, the conversations are changing to, you need to get compliant now, and you're going to have to include controls as a part of your regulatory file. And we're very much becoming the go-to for the types of controls that are needed to support this vast expansion in tests and testing capabilities. So it's actually driving business to us as hopefully things normalize a little bit further. And we've developed controls and can develop them quite rapidly. So, hopefully kidding aside here, but if, we saw something, whether it's a monkeypox or an avian flu, or God knows what else pops out, we can provide a fully regulated test control to check whether new tests are actually working and help ensure the accuracy in about 8 weeks' time. So, and we've been beating groups like the CDC and others in the speed at which we can generate an absolutely first-class control to ensure testing accuracy. So we're seeing some great growth in this area. We're also seeing growth in our viral transport medium. And this,
Cameron, may I interrupt you before you?
Of course you may.
Go on to the viral transport. Couple of questions here. So from Tracy, never thought of this before, but how often is this being done now? A couple of questions here. So how often is this being done now? Has COVID increased this amount of control testing? Are there protocols that are recommended or even regulated or mandated? And who are your competitors?
Great questions. I'll unwrap them, but let me know if I miss any components of that. In terms of test controls, it has become a best practices recommendation to use controls, and we see a wide variety of practices used. Some labs will try and save money by making their own controls, the Bob sampled in the fridge kind of stuff that I referred to earlier. And there are even some labs run, often by crusty old lab directors that think that they don't make mistakes, therefore, don't tell them how to run a railroad kind of stuff. But it's moving from recommendation to regulation. And the current regulations say that if a validated third-party control exists, you should use it as a part of your lab quality management system. But it doesn't prescribe how often. And we see lab directors that are very diligent, that will use controls at the start and the finish of every shift, when technicians come on and off for the day, when a lot number of reagents change, when a lot number of other test consumables or cartridges change, they'll use controls to make sure they're going to catch an error quite frequently. And that's incredibly important. You can Google, there was a lab near Birmingham, England, doing testing for the National Health Service in the UK, and they had an error persist through 500,000 COVID tests that they ran, and they were getting a positivity rate of only about 2%, where the surrounding counties were having positivity rates of 10% or more. So it was determined that they missed somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 positive COVID diagnoses, and sent people back into the hospital to work, back into their office, back to see their grandparents. and cause, any number of infectious spread of the Delta and Omicron variants in the UK. So these errors do occur, and they can have really bad consequences. And there's been, instances where labs were running, too many cycles on their PCR and getting false positive results, for example, and and causing communities to lock down unnecessarily. And I think we've all had it, up here with restrictions on our economic and other liberties as well. So this is causing increased awareness of the consequence of these false positives and false negatives. And ideally, we'll see more prescriptive regulation around the use of controls, so we don't have too many of these errors. In terms of competitors, there are many companies that make diagnostic tests. There's very few that make controls. There are about a half a dozen companies that do make controls at any scale globally, of which we are one. And we've really been taking technological leadership through formatting, through product design, and through intellectual property as well, that gives us some very good grabby nature on this. I won't go into too much granularity on that, but if you do want to follow up, I can happily reference you some of the patent numbers that I'm referring to, and go in greater detail on what the technological advantages we're bringing to the table that are just incredibly important. So I hope that touches on that enough. Jim, were there any other things you wanted to jump in on?
No, I think that's good. I think the other comment, when you talk about competitors and what differentiates you, you mentioned it just before the question came in, but your ability, just to reiterate, your ability to develop controls so rapidly, more so than, the CDC and your competitors.
Yes, and that really comes down to design for example, if we're doing a control for an Omicron, well, this is an RNA virus that's rapidly mutating. What is the sequence that you should lock down? And all our products tend to be whole genome, so we're not just creating something that works with an Abbott test, but not a Roche test, but not a Cepheid and not a Quidel or something. We create a product that will support and check the accuracy of everyone's tests, which is very important for us. And somebody was asking, what are some of the sales like? The spend on controls typically, if labs could do it safely, or companies could do it safely with zero spend on controls, they'd be delighted. It'd be like, if you could run your car on no gasoline, we'd all be thrilled. But it's not reality. But the economic range tends to be, if there's $1 of spend on testing overall, that the spending on controls is in the 5 to 10% of that dollar, 5 to 10 cents on that dollar. So that's the element of the market we're looking to capture. And rather than going head to head with some of these giants, I'd much rather say I can deliver the 5 to 10 cents of value you absolutely need, and not compete with you, but rather be a supplier and a customer, a supplier and a collaborator with you, rather than trying to go head to head. We just don't have the hubris to think we're going to, crush global multi-billion-dollar multinationals, but we can certainly support them very well.
Love it. And that, I think, brings us current. So I'll let you continue with VTM.
Okay, well, great. Thanks. See if I can get this slide back up on the right level. Yeah, perfect. So on viral transport medium, we kind of got into this because in our ingredients business, we were already making tens of thousands of liters per year of very complex mixtures of reagents to grow different bacteria and grow the mammalian cells that act as the host for different viruses. And we flagged for our home province. We said, hey guys, you may not have thought of it yet. This is back in April 2020, but you're about to have a big supply chain problem. And everybody's a lot more conscious of supply chain problems now than they were then. But we said, you're going to have a problem getting this stuff, viral transport medium, this is required to stabilize the samples. You know, the swabs that you see, you know, stuffed up your nose, you've all had more of these up your nose than you care to think about. But when they then take it and snap it off and put it in a tube of stuff, well, this stuff is very important, because otherwise, the moment you take the sample out, you have nasal secretions, mucus, and so forth that has the job of inactivating and breaking down viruses. And there are also bacteria that are present that would eat the sample and start multiplying, you know, quite quickly. So you've got to stabilize that sample so that if it's tested at the lab hours or days later, that the virus isn't all broken down and degraded. So very important to enable testing. And in fact, nobody in Canada was making this stuff. So we flagged to our home province and we said, we could start making this for you. Would you like us to? And they said, hell yes. And provided us a grant of 1.45 million Canadian to accelerate that process. And we've since moved forward to be able to produce 100,000 vials a week of this product for supply of Ontario. And for better or worse, they've been buying pretty much everything we can make. But we're now moving to scale to full automation. We pioneered some semi-automated production methods on this, which will take our capacity fivefold and can become strategic for other provinces and potentially US states as well. This would be a 510K medical device if we choose to go in the US market. But for now, we're supplying more broadly in Canada, and that's become about a $5 million a year business for us. Again, building concentrically from our capabilities, and should be a good business for us on an ongoing basis as well, because this isn't just COVID transport medium, it's viral transport medium. So you can use this for a whole bunch of different testing usage. And, you know, each one of these vials is worth in the, you know, $3 to $5 range that you see on the screen here. And we've been receiving, you know, multi-million-dollar orders from our province, and we're making outreaches to other provinces and jurisdictions as our capacity scales up. Currently, we can produce about 100,000 vials a week, and we're looking to scale that through full automation to closer to 500,000 vials a week. So that gives us some very good revenue generation there as well. And then, of course, the enabling skills that enabled us to capture the opportunities in test controls and viral transport medium comes from our ingredients business, where we actually make some of the critical biology for tests that are looking for antibodies in your blood to a virus or bacteria indicative of a current or past infection and your level of immunity. So we've supported any number of tests for looking for immunity. And that could be, for example, if you wanted to check, you know, is an expectant mother immune to German measles that could harm the baby in utero? Well, you would use a Microbix product, an antigen against rubella, German measles, to test for that. If you wanted to look for past exposures to bacterial lung infections that might be a cause of pneumonia or bronchitis, you can check using antibodies for that. And these can't be replaced by PCR tests, by molecular biology, because you're actually looking for the antibodies. So you need the killed bug for that antibody to bind to and drive the test reaction. So very important business for us, and very interesting in that, you know, our product sells for hundreds of dollars, products sell for hundreds of dollars a milligram. Now, a milligram is a few grains of salt in the palm of your hand. So when we sell, you know, a gram of purified rubella, for example, that might sell for $500,000 and support the creation of tens to hundreds of thousands of tests. So, but you wouldn't know that a name brand multinationals test has a Microbix kind of intel inside on it. So we were doing that quite anonymously for a number of years, and it's it had been a $1 million a month business pre-COVID. The very breadth of our portfolio meant it took a hit during COVID, but now that's actually recovering quite nicely. And it's still about 50% of our sales currently, but that proportion is falling not because of a reduction in this business, but rather because the other businesses are continuing to grow at a faster clip. Just little glimpse into some of our labs. We do work at the very leading edge of biology. These are some fixed bed bioreactors that we use to grow viruses, and each of those tabletop units is creating $50,000 to $80,000 worth of product. So you can get an idea that you can generate some very good economics out of different aspects of our business. And as we've been upgrading technologies, it's also been driving some real growth in our margins as well as our sales. So we've jumped our margins by 15% just over the 12 months from 2020 to 2021, and we're now operating at gross margins in the high 50s to mid 60s. And that's really enabled us to improve our financial ratios quite dramatically. We've seen that the financial results of the company, you can see we were on a growth trajectory pre-COVID. We got hit in 2020 due to the very breadth of our portfolio, but then turned that around in 2021 for some real sales growth. 2022 year to date, as Jim had indicated, is up as well, and we expect to finish the year in the low to mid 20s in terms of millions of dollars of revenues. More importantly, the absolute number of gross margin and EBITDA dollars that we generated shot up due to the operational rigor and the product innovation, and likewise led to a vast improvement in our current ratio and our debt to equity ratio. So we're a strong and healthy business getting stronger is sort of the messaging. We do have this slide needs updating just as the market has gotten hammered a little bit. One of the analysts covering us has dropped their target, not because of our performance, but rather because of our basket of comparables. So we have now, and we've had another analyst just pick up coverage on Monday. So we have equity research coverage from IA Capital Markets, a brokerage firm owned by a large insurance conglomerate in Canada. And then we just also had coverage initiated from a second firm called Bloom Burton Securities, that is sort of the closest thing we have to JP Morgan in Canada. Has picked up coverage with $1 target price, and IA Capital Markets has $1.25 Canadian target price. So both effectively a double from here over the next 12 months. So, where I'd sort of leave you with before we jump into questions, and I think I'm pretty much on time. We've already got and are continuing strong sales growth. We're coming off a record fiscal 21 and a record, in fact, year to date, fiscal 2022. We're generating positive cash flow. We've got ongoing gross margin expansion. We're properly capitalized for the growth that we're targeting, and that's to move from sales on the 20 million range to 100. We've got the relationships, we've got the products, and it's just a great business to consider owning. So, with that, I would thank you very much, and we can jump into a few more questions, Jim.
Terrific, Cameron. Thank you for a good presentation, informative, lots of good information in there for new and people that are already familiar with the story. One question in here, are you likely to be acquired? And then part two, are you looking at acquisitions to potentially enhance your growth?
Yes, yes and yes. There are a number of companies that could be a buyer of Microbix. I'd very much prefer double sales at least a couple more times before that happens. But we're not entrenched managers, and if somebody comes with a bona fide offer that has an adequate change of control premium, of course we'll bring it to the board and initiate a process. Right now, our messaging has been to parties that have expressed interest. We're not entrenched managers, but you better come with a pretty big change of control premium, and the control premium you need might or might not be accretive to you out of the gate, but please be serious about it if you're going to consider it. Companies that might do that could be competitors, or they could be customers, or they could be aggregators of life sciences tool companies. And I do have a list of about 20 companies that I keep an eye on in that respect. The other question I think I saw here was, are we going to need additional capital to expand our growth? We've got, as at the end of May, we had about 14 million Canadian dollars in the bank and access to another few million on bank lines if we needed it, and good capital markets relationship. We wouldn't issue equity at these levels. We'd be more inclined to buy it back, frankly. But we're well capitalized to execute on what we need. So I don't see us coming to market, unless there was a blindingly accretive acquisition that we felt we needed to undertake. But we could swing a pretty big stick for that if we needed to. But I don't see any market issuance right now. This is really about building awareness so we don't get taken out by a lowball offer prematurely. So.
Yeah, and then Stephen had a question from the beginning of the presentation that was probably more appropriate towards the end, but any plans to list on either the NASDAQ or the AMEX?
Possibly on the NASDAQ. We were, question as to at what point we should do that. I think if we're touching on sales of 50 million Canadian, 40 million US, that becomes a little more interesting. I had been shying away somewhat because of the cost of moving to double financial statements in full Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, but I've recently been advised that there's a waiver on that and up to 750 million market cap. So we could cross list and just have the listing fees as opposed to having to move to US style financial statements. We're currently, just for clarity, under IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, rather than US GAAP, but we are audited by Ernst & Young, so EY. So it's fully compliant, but it's not 10Ks, 10Qs. It's quarterlies and annual reports at this point. So that is something we'd look at. I think it's probably a year to 18 months away, but we're not against it.
Okay. And then I believe Fred Nord has his hand up. So if you're okay, I'm going to allow Fred to speak.
Please.
Fred, you're good to go. You just need to unmute your microphone.
That would be in the lower left-hand corner, Fred.
Well, we'll see if Fred comes back with that.
There we go.
A very wonderful presentation, and I'm going to buy some. Okay, that's enough. But I'm very curious, how many employees do you have, and what's the average salary? Great
question, Fred.
Well, it probably isn't, but I'd like the answer.
No, it's good. We're just below 110 employees currently. And that's really, that's not scaled so much for 20 million as it is for a lot more than 20 million. So we're gearing up in that regard. And average, we're looking at, just doing some math in my head. You're looking at an average salary would probably be about just under 70,000 Canadian dollars. So let's call it 60,000 US would be your average salary. So we're not tremendously bloated. We've got different levels of experience of technicians drive their competency, and then we've got managerial staff and then executive staff above that.
Oh, thank you. You answered all the important ones. I was just curious about this one. I'm going to buy it anyway. Thanks.
Oh, you're most well. Thank you, Fred. That's great.
Thanks, Fred. I'm put you
Yeah,
back
and
on
just
mute.
just further to Fred's commentary, we do have significant ownership within the management team. Whenever and the board, whenever we've raised capital in the past, there's been significant participation by management directors. I've bought 2.375 million shares that I haven't needed to buy, to maintain my employment. I'm along with you, so we're not just about stock options or that. We actually have downside risk and money on the table alongside shareholders. So management directors, founders collectively own about 20% of the company. We probably have about 20% institutional ownership along with that, and then the balance is a lot of higher net worth retail investors that have been with the company for a while. But trying to continue to broaden that out, and that's one of the reasons why we're working with Jim, of course.
So I see, Cameron, that we're coming up to the 1 hour mark. So as we sort of start thinking about coming to a conclusion here, one question I may have for you is, you look to the future and you've got growth on the mind. What gives you, why are you able to grow so quickly, do you think, over the next 3 years, and why are you so confident that those sales would materialize?
Well, we have the capability of generating products quickly that are needed by customers with whom we already have relationships. So that's the source of an impetus for the growth. If you've got customers saying, "Can you make this for me?" and I'll buy 100,000 units a month at tens of dollars, and you've got multiple customers wanting that capability, then it becomes a question of scaling your manufacturing, making sure. I'm dating myself with my pop culture references, but if anybody remembers the old Lucy in the Chocolate Factory thing, where she's trying to put the chocolates down and they just keep turning up the speed of the assembly line. You can't have that situation where your systems start to break down as you're using them more intensely. So what we're doing is we're increasing capacity with automation, with control systems and support systems, so that we can grow the company successfully and not have any pains or disruption in scaling. So that's a big part of what we're doing. It's capacity, it's support systems, and it's HR training and integration of employees. So we have the three buildings I showed you, and I'm actually going to tour a fourth in about 30 minutes to look at, just so we've got an empty tile to lay in some full automation for the swab-based control manufacturer, because I think we're going to need it sooner rather than later, that we may sell through the capacity building to much more quickly. So it's a pretty positive outlook, and please, this is intended as an introduction. This isn't a hard sell. It's really to encourage you to do some deeper digging, follow up with me, follow up with Jim, and we're happy to support any level of due diligence that you'd like to conduct on us. And, hopefully it's worth that further investigation for you. And thank you for the opportunity to introduce you to Microbix today.
Well, we certainly think it's worth a deeper dive. As we get set to conclude here, let me hand out today's keyword. I'm going to take something that you said earlier, your hockey reference. So I'm going to take Wayne Gretzky as today's keyword.
Okay.
A great one. So that is today's keyword. And then let me just say thank you to the attendees. Wonderful questions, lots of information brought out as a result of that. And Cameron, thank you. And if you want, I will give you the floor, sort of a way to conclude, and what I call elevator pitch final thoughts.
Elevator final thoughts. If you believe, as we do, that there's an innovation going on in medical diagnostics, this is a great opportunity to not bet on a single platform technology, but rather bet on the broader innovation of the industry by an investment in Microbix, who is supporting a broad number of these companies. So that'd be the one message I'd give. The other is that we're a profitable company that's already in a strong financial position, that's looking to grow further and create more value for shareholders. And we're professionals managing the company professionally. So, and dig further, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron, and we'll make sure to keep everybody up to date on the company's progress going forward. I may reach out to some of those analysts, Bloom Burton, who just came on board, and see if I can get a current report or their initiating report, and I'll forward that out to everybody.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week as well. Thanks, Cameron.